All right, everybody, we are ready to get started in just a couple minutes here. Let's see. Hey, Maria.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you.
Awesome.
Cool, I see you and I hear you. Okay, so we seem to
That's
be
good.
All right. Let's see this. All right. So let's see. Cool. If you want to just pull up your home screen, we can use that. Great. So I think what we can do here, Maria, while people filter in, is I will mute myself, and I'll go ahead and mute you as well. And
Okay.
once we're ready to get started at 2 o'clock, I will cue you in, and we can just dive right into it.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool. I'm going to mute myself now. All right, we're ready to get started here in just a moment. Let me go ahead and run through a few administrative items, and then we can get ready and get going. So, for folks who are just joining us now, if you have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A box down at the bottom, and we will try to get through as many questions as we can at the end of the session. Otherwise, if you're in the chat box there, just if you want to talk to everybody, make sure you type in, you better type in, let's see, if you want to talk to all panelists, that is by default. If you want to talk to other attendees, you select that in the dropdown. And let's see, the next one here, next item is, we of course are able to put on these events because of our excellent sponsors, and we have Atlassian, who is our gold sponsor, or sorry, our platinum sponsor. And as I mentioned in previous sessions, they are currently hiring in their Mountain View and in their Sydney office for design roles. So let me drop the link in here for you guys if you're interested in checking that out. Okay, and of course, they have over 200 designers on their team almost, and it is a very mature design practice. So if you're curious, definitely check them out. And we also have Salesforce, who is another one of our sponsors, and they have an excellent Medium publication that talks about how they design at scale. So definitely recommend checking that out. And of course, if this is your first time encountering us, we are UXPin, and we are a full stack UX design platform. So you can design, prototype, create your design system, generate documentation, and automate your developer handoffs all in one place. And if you're interested in checking that out, we do have a free trial as well. And with that being said, I will pass this over to Maria Judice, who is going to be talking about her experience at Autodesk.
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me, Jerry?
Yep, we hear you just fine.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, and welcome everybody. I've been listening into a couple of sessions here and there over the course of the last couple of days, and they've been incredibly informative and inspiring. And one of the observations that I thought of when I was listening to the different leaders speaking is, in a lot of ways, being a leader, there really isn't much of a playbook when it comes to being a design leader, but there are definitely patterns of excellence that you can see as consistent threads throughout all these talks today. Today, I'm going to talk about my experience working at Autodesk and really talk about what it means to be a change agent in a very large company. And some of the opportunities, some of the benefits, some of the, good things, the bad things. You could ask me any question you'd like. But first, for some reason, this isn't working. My thing isn't advancing.
Let me see here. So you clicked on the screen and it's not moving?
There we go. Thank you. Okay, so Autodesk is a company that's 35 years old. And from that company, it was really founded with the birth of AutoCAD. And so traditionally, Autodesk has a mixture of products in many different years of maturity, from heavy-duty desktop products for architects, engineers, construction people, people in manufacturing, to mobile products, people who are in the field, to cloud-based products, and now most recently we're getting into VR products. So Autodesk kind of covers the gamut when it comes to the types of problems that UX designers need to solve. It has about 8,500 employees around the world, and there are over 140 products in its portfolio. Now, over the years, Autodesk has built their own products, but they've also acquired products. So it's, when you look at our portfolio, you wouldn't necessarily think it all comes from one company. I joined Autodesk 869 days ago. That's about 2.5 years. And Autodesk, in its 35-year history, has only had one vice president of experience design. There's about 120 global locations for Autodesk employees, including many people who work at home. But of those 120 locations, there are 54 global locations where designers are. And across the company, there are well over 400 designers. These are people who have defined themselves as designers. Autodesk has different types of job titles, different levels of experience. People have gotten into the industry in many different ways. I think before there were UX designers at Autodesk, they had subject matter experts, and over time they've become UX designers. So you're going to have a lot of variety of designers who are, have come in it from different ways and different levels of quality. But what's really interesting about Autodesk is everything is changing. Everything is changing for Autodesk. First of all, the architecture, engineering, construction industry, manufacturing, even media and entertainment. All those industries are evolving as people are moving from being on these heavy-duty desktop products to being in the cloud. More and more products have to be interoperable. There has to be collaboration. And the industries themselves are really, it's kind of a moving target right now. And with that, these very typically traditional industries, their customers are changing. Because the industries are changing, what they need from Autodesk and how they work with us and with each other, it's all new. And so they have to adjust and they have to grow with us as our products evolve. And then the other big thing is that the company is moving from this process where we would basically customers will buy a box. I usually say, we do a lot of work to make a sale happen, and then we spend a year apologizing to them, and then we would reship the product and resell. Well, that has changed now because many of our products are becoming more cloud enabled. We're moving from this sort of transaction model to a subscription model, which means that essentially every month we have to ask our customers for business. So that puts a lot of emphasis on making sure that we're delivering experiences that are going to be intuitive, valuable, and seamless for our customers. So I joined Autodesk, again, as the first vice president of design. And it was a great time because with that, the leadership team, the SVPs that I reported up into, and then the CEO, everybody was ready for this kind of cultural change to happen. It was the very first time in its 35-year history that they actually put a design leader into a strategic leadership position, which is ironic because Autodesk is we create products for designers in the 3D world. And with that, I had direct access to the CEO staff. So all the conditions were lining up for me and this cultural change to be successful. So I was hired by this guy His name is Amar Hanspal, and he was the SVP of products for Autodesk. And I was working at Facebook at the time when he was talking to me about joining Autodesk. And what I was really interested in hearing from him was that he had this realization, they had this realization that Autodesk had to, in order for them to be successful, they had to evolve from being an engineering-centric company to being a design-centered company. And he was looking for a design leader who can help bring them along. And he works for this guy who was Carl Bass. Carl Bass was the CEO of Autodesk for 12 years. And with that, the combination of the two of them, they were my executive design champions. And if anybody's going to tell you the importance of being successful in enacting change, design taking a leadership position, you can't do it without executive support. It's very hard to convince executive leaders about the value of design. They might be close, they might need to be convinced, but really, if you're going to be somebody who's going to be enacting change and you're going to be coming in, you want to make sure that the executive leaders, the exec branch of the company is ready for this kind of work and to really change their mindset in terms of how they work, how they view design. Alistair Simpson from Atlassian mentioned this transition from design being thought of as a service to design being looked at as a strategic partner. You can't do that if you don't have executive support. So I was pretty lucky. And so I made the move. I left Facebook. I joined Autodesk. And my boss, Amar, said, well, you're here. What are you going to do? And I was like, I don't know. I said, give me 3 months. I'll tell you what I'm going to do in 3 months. And so what I did was, like I always do, I treat every problem like a design problem. And I did my discovery work. So I traveled to offices all over the world. And, companies like Autodesk, really these companies that have been around a long time, when a VP comes into town, it's kind of a big deal. But I never really looked at myself like that. So I would go to these offices and I would meet with people. I would meet with the interns. I would meet with the leadership. I'd meet with people in different disciplines. I sat in the kitchen and I basically would talk to as many people as I possibly could across the company, getting a huge cross section of feedback. And I would just hang out and create an environment that people weren't afraid to tell me, how they were really feeling. So I asked them a few questions. First of all, I started out with, just tell me your story. Why are you at Autodesk? A lot of people at Autodesk have been there for 5, 10, 15 years. And I would always ask, why are you here this long? And they always say, because the work is always changing. So tell me your story. And then I asked them what keeps them up at night. What is on your radar? What are the things that frustrate you about the company, about your work, about the discipline? Then I asked, well, what are your hopes and dreams? I'm in this position, I'm brand new, I have no agenda. What are your hopes and dreams? And then finally, ending it with, how can I help you? And that really, not only it helped me gather the right data, but it also enabled people to see me as a human being, to see me as somebody who's there to be helpful, not this person who sits in an ivory tower in this executive position, that I was here to get some stuff done. So then gathered a lot of data, a lot of patterns, and defined the key problems. And these are some of the key problems But for anybody who's ever been in this position, for anybody who's ever worked in really large corporations, these problems are not unique to Autodesk. They exist all over corporate America. So the first one, big one, was, you know, an engineering-centric culture really is focused on execution. It's really focused on getting to, you know, having a discrete problem, usually a hard technical problem to solve, and then solving it. You know, this culture really was afraid of like really thinking, taking the time to be strategic, and come up with a vision and a plan, and that's following a design process to get to a solution. This was very much a problem. I'm going to solve it. There were 400 plus designers all over Autodesk, but they lacked a cohesive design community. There was no way that there were no vehicles or avenues for people to convene other than their own location. Email was the dominant way that people communicated. And, you know, there was just no virtual tools or, you know, face-to-face opportunities. Everybody was working through video conference, and it would crash all the time. The third thing is imbalance of power on product teams. Again, I mentioned Alistair's talk about design being looked at as a service. Very typical in big corporations that are bringing design, are just figuring out that this, you know, customer experience is important. You usually would have very heavy duty product managers making all the calls when it came to, hello?
We're still here, Maria.
Oh, okay. I lost my picture. But everybody can hear me? We're good?
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so balance of power, product managers calling all the shots on product teams, and you know, them thinking that they're the CEO, that they own the strategy, and the designers are really just kind of what I'm calling wireframe monkeys, and engineers would just build it. The other one was there was a fragmented access to customers and research. So the product managers would have access to customers, and then they would provide feedback to the product teams to execute. So we had to change that. And also, how do we bring research into the focus and make sure that our work is being driven by qualitative and quantitative information? And then finally, because it's so focused on execution, in products like ours, there was this real focus of shipping quantity of features over really the quality of experience. So it was like, get a feature out, make it work. This is the pain point the customer wants. It's okay if quality suffers. This is, I think, a typical mindset in traditional desktop environments, because they, you know, again, they're used to shipping products once a year versus being continuous over time. And then another big inhibitor for innovation is silos. I had spent a large part of my life leading an agency. I was the CEO of Hot Studio. I ran it for 15 years. And now that I've been working inside companies now for about five plus years, there are two big things that happen inside companies that I think inhibit innovation. One is politics, and the other is silos. Now, you know, in big companies, you have to have organizational models, and that enables people to be efficient. But company silos really prevent people from working across the channel, because they're oftentimes solely measured on the things that their org defines as important. So a big takeaway for me, a big need for me that I saw right away, is that I have to do whatever's in my power to bust down the silos and work across the company and make those connections and be inclusive. Everywhere I went, people complained about the silos getting in the way of progress. And it's funny because I often say that I would go into these meetings where there were, there was a customer pain point that cut across multiple orgs. And I felt like I was sitting at a table with mob bosses where everybody was kind of like willing to give a little as long as they don't have to give up their own power. And I oftentimes say that being in those rooms is really not about being collaborative, it's more about communication. So the number one goal for me was to find every possible way to ignore where I sat in the org and make sure that I worked across the org on shared goals. And then, so from this exercise, from this listening tour, I came up with what I would call the four, sort of my value statement at Autodesk. These are the things that, the pillars, if you will, that to which I would create programming so that I could fulfill these four goals: building community, focusing on customers, connecting experiences, and shipping quality. And so this was sort of the framework that I have been using over the last 2.5 years, and creating programming inside of each of these four pillars to help move this agenda along. I'm going to touch on a few of them in the time that we have today. And I would say you can't really talk about shipping better quality products until you build a strong community. So the very first focus for me was to bring the community, the design community together, to get them to realize that they're stronger in numbers than being kind of like separate and relegated to scrum teams, and to get them to start talking to each other. So when I joined the company, my boss said, when I joined the company, there was a summit every year for engineers where they would get together, and they would, it would be an internal design conference, and they would all attend, and they'd present to each other, and there'd be parties, and it was like a 3-day event for engineering. And so when I joined the company, I was given the task to design an internal conference for designers. And I had to do it like within 4 to 5 months. So in 2015, I put together the very first design conference called the X Summit. And it felt a little different than the engineering summit, which was, go into a hotel, be in these, tracks with, bad lighting, bad furniture, bad food, speakers that couldn't really, tell a story. And I really treated this as a design problem where I speak at enough conferences to know what's really good. And so the very first touch point was to create an experience for the X Summit. And we did it over the 3-day period. And I framed it, it was an opportunity for me to frame it as Design's Coming Out Party. And so the goal of this conference was to change people's mindset. This was an opportunity where I can change people's mindset from design being thought of as a thing that people make to a verb, which is something that everybody is responsible for, not just designers, product managers, engineers, QA people. Design is something that we all share, that we all need to do together. And just last week, I had my 3rd X Summit, And this X Summit focused on cohesion. And just to kind of give you a sense of the numbers that come to the X Summit, there were 375 people. Half of them were designers, half of them were multidisciplinary. Of those 375 people, 120 of them were volunteers. So I have a very small staff. I have like 15 people who report to me. And the only way I could accomplish these kinds of programs is through volunteer efforts. And from that X Summit, 350 proposals were written for 62 sessions. And there were 82 speakers from 8 different countries over a 3-day period. And so this X Summit not only brings people together, but it really was a turning point for Autodesk, almost like a wake-up call, so that for Autodesk to realize that this was the arrival of the experience era at Autodesk. So number 2, focusing on customers. How do we make Autodesk the most customer-centric company in the world? So as I mentioned earlier, Autodesk is not used to having many researchers. There's not enough researchers to go around in a company like Autodesk, which is very typical for big companies that are just waking up to customer-centered design. So making Autodesk the most customer-centric company in the world is aspirational, but very attainable. And, you know, other than demanding that product teams have access to customers, how do we actually make research part of our process when there's so very few of them to go around in the company? So we do have researchers, and what we decided that we would do is continue to advocate to have more researchers, but then how do we teach others how to do good research? How do we enlighten engineers? How do we enlighten product managers? If they don't have research support, how do we enable them? How do we give them the tools so that they can do their own research work? So at Autodesk, this is actually before I joined, there was a movement created to teach people at Autodesk human-centered design methods. And there's this one program that, there's so many human-centered design programs out there, but there's this one program called Luma. And you could look it up, lumainstitute.org, I believe is the URL. And they basically have done an amazing job to package human-centered design methods in easy, digestible forms that they just make it easy for non-designers to understand design methods. So we have this program at Luma. It's about 3 years in the making at Autodesk, and approximately 20% of the population of Autodesk from all different disciplines, not just product, but marketing and sales and customer service, they've all taken this program, so they at least have a baseline to understand how to be strategic using human-centered design methods. And some of those methods are research-based, but we've also augmented the Luma Kit to include things like how to interview, how to do really good contextual inquiries, and how to create good, really do good quantitative surveys, for example. If you don't have enough researchers, how do you train people to do the research and be part of the design process? The other thing we've done is we train people how to do good research methods, and then we've taken advantage of Autodesk's annual user conference. It's 10,000 people. They converge in Las Vegas every year to hear about the new products and to get some training. So we set up carved out an area at it's called AU's Autodesk University. We carved out an area and we called it the Idea Exchange. And basically we staffed the space with people who could do research at Autodesk, and we paired them with customers. So we would have, big questions on a board. We'd then go and look for customers who had expertise in the software or this problem we were trying to solve. We'd bring them in and conduct research sessions in mass. There were, I think, about 120 people doing research, and they served about 500 people last year. Did this over the course of 3 days. Then we collected all the research, and then we started to identify consistent patterns, and then we took those big themes and we created all hands and shared them out globally for people all over the world. We also had a repository where people could get the research reports, and with that were recorded videos because we're a global company, so they had access to the share outs as well. Okay, so we talked about building community. We talked about focusing on customers. Now I'm going to talk about connecting experience. So, as mentioned, Autodesk has about 120 products, 140 products, lost count. And many of those products were obtained through acquisition. So, but our customers use multiple products through their customer journey. And then these products, they don't necessarily, the data doesn't necessarily elegantly port from one product to the other. So how do we build cohesive, seamless, intuitive, connected experiences? So we've identified some top pain points and created tiger teams to solve some of the big gnarly problems. But we also, like every other progressive company that's out there, every single one of us have created our own design system, a pattern library. So we just launched the Autodesk pattern library. We call it the Autodesk HIG, which is Human Interface Guidelines. And this was just launched at the X Summit last week. So fresh off, it's like hot off the press. It's our beginning kit of pattern library. For the first time ever in the history of Autodesk, we have gotten a Human Interface Guidelines pattern library. Big, big deal. They have tried this in the past and failed. But this time is different. Because I think the timing is right. It's a lot easier to continuously improve and continuously develop web products over desktop products. The customers are changing and they're demanding this kind of consistency. And this is what it means to be a modern technology company. So we just launched it with fresh components. And I think the other important thing about why I think this design system is going to be successful over the other ones that have failed is because it's not just this isn't just a system for designers. It's a code repository. It's a code library. So every component has accompanying code and a React framework. So if you want people to start using a pattern library, the most important thing is you have to make it painfully easy for teams to pick up these components and insert them into their own product experiences. So that's what we do. We also created a designer toolkit where we created robust sketch files with, clear labeling, clear layering. So designers now have a bar of quality they have to hit when they're actually creating files that have to be shared. And we also have an accompanying Git repository for developers to go and contribute code. Okay, so the fourth one is about shipping quality. How do we create products and services that people will love? How do we aspire to a higher bar of quality for our products and services? And, you know, oftentimes when I talk about quality and I evangelize quality at Autodesk, I'm like, raise your hand. How many of you, you know, how many of you want to ship shitty products? Of course, nobody raises their hand. Nobody wants to ship bad products, but priorities get in the way. There's time constraints. People are on Scrum teams. There are resource constraints. There might not be the right amount, a healthy ratio between designers and engineers. So designers always feel that they're rushed to come up with good work. Engineers might not have enough people on their Scrum teams to actually execute to a level of quality. There's like a million reasons why the quality bar isn't as high as it needs to be at Autodesk. And we have to fix all those things. But the fact is, you can't make that excuse because the customer doesn't care. And, you know, I pulled the data from the GCSO is a service organization that monitors customer complaints. And so I was able to pull this data point from them and say that in 1 year, our customers lost 500,000 hours of productivity due to defects and crashes in the system. And that is only what we can count. There's a whole bunch of things that go through a partner channel that we can't count. So this is not a number that we should be proud of. And to convince people, you know, there's a ton of data around the importance, the business value of shipping customer-centric products, and a ton of data around what I say is the cost of inaction. And I often say you're paying the trust tax. So even with, you know, balancing, you know, whether making the decision whether or not to ship something that's suboptimum, you will pay the trust tax, and it takes 3 times longer for people to recover from a negative emotion from a positive one. So it's, you know, it's accumulative when you, over time, when you're not shipping good product design. So how do we balance, you know, the difference between building the right product and building the product right? So really it came down to, let's start with having a unified language around what it means to ship quality, because everybody has their own definition of quality. So phase 1, shipping quality experiences at Autodesk, was to come up with a framework where we can start defining quality for our product teams. So we did that, and this is what we call the quality pyramid at Autodesk. And it's sort of modeled after sort of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs as well, where you have to kind of start from the bottom. The first thing is resilience. Resilience is, you know, is our product stable? Is it secure? Is the data reliable? You know, when you click the icon, does the product open? So, you know, making sure that should be non-negotiable. All of those things have to be there in order to ship quality products. The next rung up is value. You know, and typically when we talk about resilience, we're talking about this is really where the engineers like to live. The next rung up is value. This is where I think the product managers like to live, which is, you know, is it really valuable? How do you know it's really valuable? And I've seen this in meetings where people are like, it's going to be valuable, but it's not valuable yet. I'm like, well, if it's not valuable yet, why are you prioritizing it now? So is it truly immediately clear to customers that this is something that's relevant, that they care about? Taking the next level up, usable. This is where the UX team likes to live. Is it, you know, intuitive? Does it sound human? Does the voice and tone sound like it's, you know, coming from a person? Are tasks streamlined? Does the experience feel consistent? And then finally, getting up to the top, which is lovable. That's where you going. That's a big jump to go from like and love. There's a lot of good products out there, but you can't get to great unless you get to lovable. So that's where you have to kick it up in a notch, that the product has to feel well crafted. It has to feel like we've built it, like we care about people. What are those sort of inspiring moments of delight, those surprises in there that make people laugh or be surprised or they appreciate? Are failures graceful? So what we did was we developed this pyramid, and then you can see is that we created a 20-question checklist that we've given to product teams where they can now start having a conversation about whether or not their product is, their sprint is of the right quality where they could actually press the ship button. This idea of MVP, we all know MVP is bad. People have this viable product. It's too generic for people to really understand. This is the world where, we tend to live in, where we really need to think about a minimum lovable product, where we're actually creating a slice of the pyramid based on time and resources. So our next step is, we've talked about the what, how do we define quality? Our next step is to identify measurements of success and how people can ship quality based on whether they're a product manager, an engineer, or a designer. So build community, focus on customers, connect experience, shipping quality. Those are the 4 pillars. Now, where am I now? 869 days later. You start at a company and you just feel like you see the top of the mountain and you are sprinting to the top of the mountain. And over the last 2.5 years, we have done a significant amount of work that we can feel proud of. But in reality, this is really what happens. In reality, when you're a change agent, you got hills, you got dips. There's a point where there's like a big dip, and you have to figure out how you're going to recover. So in big companies, leadership changes, your design champion changes, your reorg, your politics. There's this great book to read about how you can deal with the realities of the dip. Very important to survive the dip, make your work visible, make sure your successes and failures are measurable, make sure your work aligns to business goals, build your community, make sure you're giving credit, especially to the people who are your detractors, and be committed to change, especially when it gets hard, because it will get hard. And so being a change agent, not the easy path to make, but the most important thing is that you have to recognize that this is the hard road to choose, but it's all worth it if you could stick with it and persist. So I will leave you with this quote from Gandhi. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. So thanks everybody for taking the time. I landed exactly on time, thankfully. I'm ready to take questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria. That was fantastic. I'm sure there's going to be quite a few questions around your journey so far. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. For folks, of course, if you have any questions, you can drop it in the Q&A box. And this question comes up quite often. It's come up in previous sessions, and I'm sure, obviously, you had to consider this quite a bit in the beginning, but how can a designer or a design leader persuade an executive leader to invest in design, right? What are those sort of what are those core talking points that start to really resonate?
Yeah, well, this is a very relevant question for me right now because those two cool guys that I showed you a picture of earlier, my boss, Amar Hans-Paul, who is the SVP of product, and Carl Bass, who is the CEO of product, both of them left the company recently. So we have a new CEO who started about 3 months ago. And so I went into the office and, pitched him a deck around why design is important. The way I set it up was, first of all, I talked about the outside, what all the data is from the outside, how companies like Atlassian are investing in design in droves. IBM is investing in design, that designers are at leadership positions, that customer experience is a competitive differentiator. Put all the data in front of them. Then I talked about the state of design at Autodesk. So I painted a very bleak picture. And then I gave them a solution set, a bunch of asks. How might we, move our company to be more customer focused? And then the final thing was, what's the cost of inaction? Say you thought all of this is good. What are the risks if you don't do anything? And here's the cost of inaction. So I presented that to the CEO. He really appreciated it. The jury, frankly, the jury's out. The jury's out whether or not he's going to bite in terms of, double downing on design. And, the reality is it's very difficult to convince people in executive leadership positions unless you could tie it to the business goals and you could put numbers in front of them and you can say, if you don't do X, you are going to lose X number of customers. If you can tie that, then people will start making sense, start paying attention. But it must be tied to the business goals that keep them up at night.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely in the theme of kind of what the other design leaders in our summit so far have kind of mentioned. And now there's another question here. So you talked about having or implementing a sort of ship quality checklist that
yes,
that you've really tried to drive home at Autodesk. How did you ensure that checklist was actually used appropriately, and was there a way in which that checklist was kind of measured in terms of success for that?
Yeah. So the next step is tying that what to the how. So I launched the checklist at the engineering summit. And to be honest, everybody was just appreciating the fact that we could have a unified point of view about the quality. And now Scrum teams, certain people are taking it into their Scrum teams and they're using it as like definition of done. So I've seen various degrees of success and iteration based on some of the feedback of use. So that, I call it a working document. And so that's what we're in the process of right now is people are using it. They're reporting back how they're using it. And we're now going to the next level, which is trying to figure out how we can make it part of the Scrum method and process that we teach at Autodesk. So it's well received right now. You're always going to get detractors. You're always going to get people who are saying it's not measurable. Well, that's what we're working on right now, depending on where you sit. So for example, if you're measuring resiliency, you want to measure downtime. You want to make sure that you're building instruments in place to make sure that things don't fail or they fail gracefully. If you are looking at value, then you should be looking at, monthly active users. Or if you're looking at usability, you can look at productivity, like how quickly can people complete tasks. So we're starting to create that metric based on where you are in the quality pyramid.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. Uh, Someone here is curious about um, kind of if you could do things over again, what would you change in your approach?
Mm.
So, for instance,
Mm.
they're curious, what did you learn that in retrospect you could have done at Autodesk that may
Yeah.
have changed the culture faster than your original plan?
Yeah. Totally. I'm always in retrospect about, successes and failures. And I think that I'm still not good at is navigating the political landscape. I hate politics. I'm a straight shooter. And, in a company like Autodesk, with me coming on board, people were really skeptical. First of all, they're skeptical about culture change, but these are people who've been working in these industries for many years, and they've seen people come and go. And I feel like there's a fair amount of detractors who are just waiting for me to fail. So I'm aware of that. But I think that in retrospect, what I should have done is better identify who those high-powered detractors are. And I should have done a better job partnering with them and understanding how I could make their lives easier. Because oftentimes people think when somebody like me comes in, that I'm going to slow them down, that I'm going to take their resources. And to some extent, that's true across the board. But how do I make it so that they feel like I'm a partner and not an adversary?
Yeah, absolutely. And let's see here. Um, Another question here, and this is interesting. I've heard this being a struggle at other companies as well, which is when you're working with product managers or executive leadership on investing in long-term results through design, and they get some pushback where they try to emphasize more short-term, the short-term goals and the short-term metrics, and they push on how those are more important. How do you kind of balance that in your approach to them to convey that design is still valuable,
Yeah.
even in the short
To
term?
be honest, this is the primary pain point, right? Because a lot of people have short-term thinking. Everybody falls victim to short-term thinking, and designers tend to want to be much more long-term in their approach. So it's very hard to push through even things like the Hig, where in many people's minds they're thinking that uh, they have to actually slow down to implement better UX things, or they think of the Hig as decoration. It's not a feature that we have to ship. And so, first of all, you need to have people who are in those positions value what you're doing. I have had varying degrees of success working with product managers and their teams. If I had, I think I'd be a whole lot more effective if I had more of authority to tell people that they need to do things, but I don't. So I have to lead by influence, and I have to be patient. I really try to figure out where are those levers I can pull. There might be certain products that are having real competitive pressures, and they're stressed out that they have to get features out because they're not even at parity. So there's no way I could impact their sprint schedule. But are there products that are just coming on that need what we have to offer? So start looking forward and start looking at these new products and saying, hey, you don't even have patterns yet. Use our patterns, partner with us, and in exchange, we'll prioritize building Hig components that'll fulfill your needs. So these are the kinds of ways that we're kind of getting in, which is, if you do this, then we'll do this. But there are certain products that I just can't go anywhere near because they're way too competitive and they're in a feature parity war. So I've had varying degrees of success in this area.
Right, right. Yeah, that, again, that sort of experience seems to kind of span um, multiple people's experiences here from what we've heard in the sessions as well. So it's not hugely surprising. The next question here is, let's see here. And this is kind of a related question, I guess, but focusing more on just honing in on when it comes to mind, in all the time you spent at Autodesk so far, in the 800 plus days, what would you say are the biggest obstacles that you've had to face, and what did you find was useful in overcoming that?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a ton of big obstacles. I think
maybe we could just focus on like top three, maybe just to keep it simple.
The top three obstacles. Well, I think right now leadership changes is the one that's keeping me up at night, right? Because I've invested so much time courting and working with the leadership team, and now they're all different. And you're going to have different varieties of people who are standing behind the kind of change I'm trying to create. And then there are people who really don't believe in it at all. So in a lot of ways, that showing the dip and going up and down the hill, I'm kind of in a dip right now where I have to figure out, is it worth fighting for, like staying? Is the leadership team going to block my progress and I need to leave? Or do I wait for the next reorg that's inevitable and lie low? So you have to kind of understand your strategies depending on, where you are and what's worth being persistent about. That's the number one leadership changing that's going to affect my ability to be effective. And then the other one is making sure that the HIG, which was launched last week, is actually going to be in product. Because it's one thing to build these components, but if people aren't actually consuming the components, then that would be considered unsuccessful. So I'm going to just start with two, but those are the two big ones. And then still, the third one I'm going to throw in is, product managers still thinking that they run the show when they really don't. So how can I have an impact and teach product managers that they're just part of the trifecta? They're not in charge.
Right. And on a related note, this is actually less about culture and getting buy-in and more about design process. So in your time at Autodesk, have you seen any major differences in either design process, workflow, or methods with some of the products that Autodesk has, especially with the advanced visualization and even 3D modeling products that they have versus traditional kind of 2D flat interface products that maybe you've worked with before?
The process, well, first of all, 3D is something that's new to me. I've always been a 2D designer, and when I joined Autodesk, I've been thrown into the 3D world. But to be honest, in my career, the context is deep. It's the markets are really complicated, and in order to be really good at designing these products, you have to go deep and be a subject matter expert. But there's also a lot of problems to solve, customer problem solves, like how people access their account, how they renew. There's a lot of things that are independent of whether it's a 2D or 3D company that I could actually have a lot of impact on. I actually do feel like over the last 2.5 years, I've made a lot of positive impact in terms of design process, quality. These are big things that cut across all products, and that's where I focus my energy. And even though the road has been rough at times, I'm very, very proud of the progress that we've made for a 35-year-old company over a short period of time of 2.5 years.
Right. And let's see here. The next question we'll have is, so you talked a little bit about this idea of, instead of just minimum viable product, this idea of a minimum lovable product. What was the reaction to that like at Autodesk? Were they able to grasp the difference and implement any changes accordingly?
Yeah, some people loved it and some people hated it. You know, when you think about love and engineering, they don't necessarily go hand in hand unless engineers are really enlightened by it. So I have gotten, you know, like even the word lovable really like freaked people out. But then that's when I double down and say, okay, if you're uncomfortable, that means I'm on the right path. So I think the quality, so the quality piece that I've only given you a tip of the iceberg. I've been evangelizing quality, and I have a whole presentation that I've been giving across the company around the importance of quality and setting it up. And I think I think it's mixed still. I think that you still have people who are really like conditioned to move as quickly as possible to ship features. And like I said, this is a legacy, a holdover from the desktop world stage where you had a year, you know, to apologize to people for your bad experiences. Now, in a world where you are in a subscription model where people are essentially renewing every month, the pressure will be on for our products to be better. And there are certain competitors in certain markets that are eating our lunch because their products are easier to use. And I spend no time, I'm very quick to point that out and putting that data in front of executive leadership. And I'm saying, okay, this competitor, by the way, they just pushed out a whole new release. And in their release, they talk nothing about features. They talk everything about making their products easier to use for people on construction sites. So there you have it. So if you want this competitor to continue to eat our lunch, then you just go ahead and do those features in a subpar way, and you will lose numbers to competitors. So I'm constantly pushing that in people's face. So the lovable piece, you know, they might freak out by the word, but at the end of the day, the goal is to get people to ship better quality work.
Right, right. And since we're coming, up on the end of the session here, I'm going to just ask one final question. Unfortunately, we can't get through all the questions because there's always more than we can get to in a session. But this last question is actually quite interesting, which you know, I think you're not the only designer or design leader who doesn't necessarily play the game of politics, right, in an organization. And so if someone is curious, then if you don't get directly involved in the company politics, what have you found to be useful for either navigating it or just cutting through it and still getting the point understood clearly when you want to just communicate as clearly and straightforward and kind of candidly as possible?
Can you repeat that question, Jerry? I'm unclear what you're asking.
Yeah, the question here is really more around, do you have any advice for navigating politics when somebody who may not, you know, just want to play that game and get directly involved?
Yeah.
How do you kind of get your point made really clearly and
Well, one of the speakers talked about that book, Radical Candor. That's a good book to read. You know, I would say you have to hone your communication language when you're dealing with people who are very political. First of all, over-communicate and document everything, okay? So that's one thing that I always do when I know that I'm around somebody who's really political, because people who are political will tend to change their mind and blame you. So I keep everything documented, and I'm very clear try to be as clear with my communication as possible. I try to be very straightforward. I try not to leave anything on the table that's ambiguous. So those are the kinds of things that I do in a political environment. And I refuse to play into the politics. At the end of the day, if you are working for a company that's highly political and has a leadership team that doesn't believe in design, I wouldn't stay around very long, because they're very hard levers to pull and they require a lot of hard work.
Right. And on that note, I think we'll close out the session. Thank you so much, Maria, for your time here and sharing your experience. This is fantastic. People really appreciated sort of your honest look at your experiences, and also for how other folks may tackle similar challenges. So this has been great.
My
And for
pleasure.
everybody, yeah, and everybody else who joined us here, great questions, very relevant questions that
Yep.
that's definitely a pattern in the industry from what we've seen.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just so everybody knows, tomorrow and Friday, the summit is still on. So I hope to see the rest of you in the remaining days. We're halfway through now, hard to believe. And all of or the recordings and the slides will be sent in one batch email next week. So keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, I will see everybody at the rest of the sessions. And again, great job, Maria.
Thank you.
All right, take
All
care,
right,
everybody.
bye.